I decided to make what's called a Draw My Life video, where I draw out my life as I tell it. I am making this right now for my Spiritual Biography class, but I was planning to do it as soon as I got out of school anyway. Also, I just turned 18, so why not tell the world how I got to this point? Let's get started. I was born in Michigan, specifically Harper Woods. I always like to say it's a square-mile town surrounded on 3 sides by Detroit and 1 side by Grosse Pointe. Although it's more accurate to say half is Detroit, 1 side is Grosse Pointe Woods, and the top side is East Point and St. Clair Shores. Overall, Harper Woods was a nice, quaint little suburb with not much going on. I'm a Tigers, Pistons, and Red Wings fan, but I am also not very into sports, so that carries little weight. It's also probably a reason why I don't really care how fit I am and spend so much time in front of a computer screen. I still live in the same house I was raised in, and though I'm technically an adult, my parents are still trying to be my compass to success. This is a decent way to describe how they have contributed to my life. As a kid, they really wanted to keep me happy and protect me from the ignorant people in the world. They wanted me to only know success and deal with everything else only when I would be mature enough to handle it. I went to a Catholic preschool which was taught by nuns. I only remember 2 very important things from that experience. First, I can't stand liver, and second, my cousin Jacob loves broccoli. I started public school for kindergarten at Beacon, and I think the reason why they let me go there was because it was literally across the street from my house. Kindergarten was fun and exciting. We were all new kids and making friends. A lot of people forget how easy it is to make friends when you're very little. I remember the playground. It was really fun and had a slide that was really big but looks so small now, and had a chain link bridge and everything. I also remember the older kids who would show up after school and jump on the bridge until it broke, so it would be closed the next day, and the night where some older kids thought it would be a good idea to set off fireworks on the wood chips, right next to the entirely wooden playscape. Every little kid was devastated when half the playscape was destroyed overnight, and we would get so angry at the older kids for breaking our bridge on a regular basis. But let's move on. My parents have stayed together to try and raise me as well as possible, but nothing could prevent what happened in first grade. There was this girl who would do nothing but physically antagonize me. She would do things like take my pencils and throw them under the table. She would get her friends to join in the process of kicking me while I was under the table to get them. I knew they would do this, but I had to get the pencils. My teacher was about as useless as they could get. I would always do what you're taught to do and tell your teacher or an adult. And since my teacher would be the only adult in the room, I would tell her. She would do nothing to fix any of it. Also, when I look back at my life and realize I may not have been as normal as others, I would catch on to some ideas ridiculously quick, obsessed with symmetry and matching. It took abnormal amounts of time to finish in-class work. As a result, my teacher, being the wonderful and understanding person she was, would put me in the timeout chair to finish my work. Why? Because she cleverly deduced that the only reason a student could possibly not finish work is if they were talking to other classmates. Despite the fact that I didn't really care for most of my classmates and some of them physically abused me. But I really should thank her, because she proved just how little she paid attention to us by doing this. Also, she let me experience what I would have to endure for many years to come. Before I progress, let me say that I have a strong relationship with empathy and perspective. Everything someone does in life can be answered by their perspective. After all, that's how we're raised to believe. Don't do something to someone you wouldn't want them to do to you. Sharing is caring. Don't insult a person before you walk a mile in their shoes. I especially like that last one because then you're a mile away and you have their shoes. I truly feel like I'm in the same situation as someone else when I see their situation, whether it's good or bad. I would much rather experience joy by giving something to someone else and watch them than keep it for myself. At the same time, I suppose this has desensitized me to my own life. I do not feel bad for things that I suppose I should feel bad for, because that would mean that I would have to feel bad for everyone who was in a similar situation, and that would just be too much. Instead, I prefer the idea of being solemn. I'd rather keep a straight face and take things for what they are than get mixed up in some crazy emotion. Let me get back on track. The years following first grade weren't nearly as bad. In second grade, I had the same teacher I had for kindergarten, who just so happens to be my favorite teacher ever. I also was in the same class as my best friend, so that was a plus. Times were pretty good. I don't really remember 3rd grade, and grades 4 through 6 at Tyrone. There's not much to say here with 2 exceptions. I remember one day during lunch overhearing someone talk about their brother at some Detroit school. He was talking about how his brother kept getting beat up, and their mom told him that he should fight back next time. He then concluded his story by expressing how Tyrone sucked because they watched your every move. To this day, I don't understand how anyone, especially kids, could feel upset by people trying to keep order. The other thing worth noting is how kids started to get a bit more and more against me. I was the odd one out, the nerd, the geek, the skinny kid. The best friend I had still stuck by me despite him being one of the popular kids. Oh, and the hundreds of full-blown projects in 6th grade that kept me up into the middle of the night. But at least I got the Presidential Award for maintaining a 3.5 GPA or higher for 3 straight years. The real twist came into middle school. This is where it was obvious that I wasn't well liked. Kids were rude and obnoxious. In 7th grade my grades started to slip because I couldn't do the work in class. Every teacher would have us for so long, then we'd have to move on to the next room, giving us no time to complete the homework, which I would always do in class. I still pulled through well enough, but there were some close calls. Of course, absolutely no one knew about this since I was still one of the smartest kids in the school. 8th grade is when it became a bit more obnoxious. Students would occasionally punch me as we walked down the hall. This only happened very rarely. Note that I was never beat up, but that's too often for any student. Not to mention the verbal abuse, not just towards me, the smarty, but also the losers, like the kid I'll call Michael. I would get abused because I was different and didn't fit well with others, especially in conversations. However, they still often acknowledged how I would be the most likely to succeed in the class. Michael, on the other hand, had nothing going for him. He had a funny voice, spoke poorly, had dandruff, and worst of all, he wasn't aware of how much people had it in for him. I knew that I wasn't well liked, and the more I talked, the more unliked I would be. He had no such knowledge, so he would talk and talk until everyone got annoyed and started picking on him. Also, the nice quaint little town that I've known all my life was turning dark. Kids from out of town started showing up, causing trouble. Normally this wouldn't be too bad if it didn't mean that the nice people that didn't want to deal with any of it moved out, making room. The more the positive citizens moved out, the more the negative ones moved in, which would eventually drive even the more resistant citizens out. Over a matter of 5 years, my hometown has gone down the drain, and the schools along with it. Teachers and principals couldn't be bothered to enforce disciplinary action because parents with the "my son is the greatest human being on earth" complexes would rise up and yell back. They were, and still are, afraid. This was proven when I had been playing football in gym with a couple other kids. It was two-hand touch, of course, and it was one of the few times I would be physically active. During one of our games, I had promised myself that the person I was covering wouldn't so much as see the quarterback, no matter what. He didn't take too kindly to my persistent blocking, so he sucker punched me right in the cheek from behind. When we were taken to the office, the gym teacher watched the clip with the principal from the security cameras. They quietly conversed, then pulled in my attacker, which sounds way more dramatic than it was. I could hear the gym teacher get all worked up about how the kid was denying the intentional assault. "Your arm was outstretched," I heard him saying from behind the door. After a minute or two, I was let in. The principal was the only adult that talked while we were all present. They asked me if I really wanted to get this boy in trouble, if I was absolutely positive that I wanted to push him through for punishment, for something that may have been in the heat of the moment. I looked at the gym teacher, I looked at the principal, and then I looked at the kid next to me. This was the situation I had been waiting for years. And every fiber of my brain yelled yes, but I said no. What did I learn from this? I learned that the authority figures really didn't want to bring up issues that could ignite the rage of parents. Also, I realized just how much I couldn't discount my benefit of the doubt. No matter what, I can't discount a person, even when they physically assault me over a game of football in the corner of a gym. Also, the kids I grew up with Whether they ended up indifferent to me thanks to the influence of my lifelong friend, or didn't like me, I saw how they grew up. They turned into the older kids that would screw around at Beacon's playground, ruining equipment. The chain link bridge is now a solid wood platform. A fancy and fun piece of cement was removed because older kids were chipping away at it, making it unsafe for little kids to be underneath. And the parents who complained about the bruises kids got from one of the jungle gyms with the wooded poles and metal beams, meaning that it had to be taken away, despite all of the fond memories it created and the fun experiences it provided. This all sounds terribly wretched and horrific to live through, but let me assure you, I didn't pay it much attention. I kept my head down and my eyes open. I learned that following the lessons on how to deal with bullies was complete fraud. Standing up for yourself would be the fastest way to get taken down. Just keep your mouth shut, do your work, and relax at home. That's how I lived. However, all of this framework and setup of routines gets all completely turned around. Everything I became numb to and ignored goes away. Mostly. And I end up realizing what I missed by keeping my head down for so long. I've been a Boy Scout for years and years. Every step of the way from Tiger Cub to Life Scout. And very unfortunately, I will not get Eagle. And it is my own fault because of my current state. But more on that later. Anyways, I love summer camp, Coal Canoe Base, perhaps my favorite place on earth. So much fun and excitement, and best of all, fellowship. You can find anyone to talk to, anyone at all. So imagine my sheer excitement when I decided to work there, having freshly turned 14, the minimum age to be employed, and leaving middle school to go to a fine, high-standard private high school starting in the fall. I knew that I wasn't on top of the world, but it was coming. My freshman year would not have been anything like what it was if I didn't work at my camp. The youngest member on staff and working at the Ecology Conservation Center, or EcoCon for short. I conversed with actual people with different and unique perspectives. People going to college, people in college, people who casually discuss sex, people like me who prefer to avoid the subject. People who had some inkling what was going on in the world. Was I treated like a kid? Yes, but only because I was, and not too much. I didn't mind, mostly because they were still friendly, and didn't change their tone or actions because I was present. Most of all, I saw the behind the scenes. For years I had been attending the camp, and never had I taken note of teachers' personalities. I viewed them all as teachers. I listened and did what they said. Now I'm talking with them on a personal level. I got to see what I was missing out on. I saw the counselors hold fun conversations with scouts and how they would interact. Something I never did. It was like a last-second crash course for changing my personality. This is how I should be in high school. Making connections and friends, building bridges with people you'll probably never meet again, purely for the fun of it. I arrived planning to stay for the whole summer. But things didn't quite turn out that way. I was sent home after 4 weeks because I was too young to be up that long. My parents were quite upset because they gave no forewarning that this was a possibility. They loved having me back home, a lot, but were concerned that I've been let down. I kind of was, but I was better off. I now had a new perspective in life. Time to use it. Once again, I lucked out just before freshman year of high school. I joined the band, so went to band camp. I made many good friends, held sincere conversations, made stupid jokes, and so on. Yet I never lost who I actually was. I got a calm demeanor and still avoided topics I considered crude or immature. But these were people I could trust. I knew that no matter what they said, they were worth being friends. And most of us still are. If I didn't have this opportunity, it would have been a lot lonelier at school, primarily because it's harder to make acquaintances when you're focused on getting from class to class and finding time to do your homework. So while my social life finally emerged into existence, my personal management went on break. I began truly struggling with grades for the first time. My test scores were always decent because I could catch on so quickly, but the homework would always add drama. I got seriously into video games, and especially YouTube, to fill the time that should be spent working. Most people assume that this means video games and the internet are the root of all the problems in my academic life, to which I respond no, but yes. Video games invaded my life like nothing else, and so did YouTube. I always looked at YouTube as that shady part of the internet that I shouldn't really be on. I discovered how fun and distracting video games can be, especially when you're trying to distract yourself from work. But I took them seriously. I dove into their history and potential. What games are good at telling stories, which ones are just fun to play, which ones need strategy, which ones are just point and shoot. And most importantly, I experienced struggle. My grades through all of high school have been close calls. If I was piloting a ship and crashing through the walls for failing marks, then the haul I took is dented beyond belief. I don't look back with true remorse. I call it experience, needed experience. In fact, I feel bad for the kids that are getting valedictorians at my prestigious school because they don't have the experience that I do. I know what it's like to be on the top of the world looking down at the people below me. But I also know what it's like to be at the bottom looking up at these know-it-alls. And to be honest, neither one is the full side of the story. You cannot go through life without meeting some trouble or some obstacle or some period of time where things just seem empty or anticlimactic. They will happen. Now I know what to expect and what I can truly rely on. Friends, connections, and impressions mean everything. Being brutally honest about your flaws and using them to build character is an attribute. I have never experienced depression because I have learned to only build myself up from the worse I make things, not tear myself down. That's how I get by today. So I didn't sit down and earn my ego. That's depressing. It's something I can never redo. But that's the way it is. I made it to Life Scout, which is pretty gosh darn far, and I already got everything I felt I could get from Boy Scouts. So I don't have the badge to prove my leadership. I'll find a way to prove it to the people who need to know, because I know that I still have it. As for high school, it's been a blast and an experience. There's nothing quite like it. Any personal stories I tell won't be very relevant, and there's so many to pick from that they will just drag this video on and on. I will say this much, however. After attending 4 years of private Catholic schooling, I've learned a lot. I had amazing teachers, like Mr. Duns, who are fun to listen to and generally agreeable and relaxed in interpretation. People like him taught me that it's pointless to persecute. The most memorable story he told us is when he was in line at a grocery store in his Jesuit training outfit, which the mother in front of him noticed and hugged her son closer to her, which would be ridiculous if you took 10 seconds to know the guy. Then there's the teacher who is super conservative Catholic and believes in following whatever ridiculous thing the church says next. There's the ex-Jesuit who tries not to take a side in order to remain as open as possible. And finally there's the teacher who promotes love and peace, and how the best way to achieve peace is by understanding everyone's beliefs. I've loved 3 out of the 4 teachers, the one I didn't care too much for being the one who insisted on a single right answer, and that answer was the church. Being raised in a Catholic, moderate, conservative household it was, I went to catechism every Monday and church on every Sunday up until I was confirmed, so I suppose that helped push my belief in perspective. As David Foster Wallace once said, it's a matter of my choosing to do the work of somehow altering or getting free of my natural, hardwired default setting, which is to be deeply and literally self-centered, and to see and interpret everything through the lens of self. People who can adjust their natural default setting this way are often described as being well-adjusted, which I suggest to you is not an accidental term. Jesus had tried to teach us to be well-adjusted. Interpret things loosely, not for your personal gain, but rather so you may accept new ideas. This is how I believe. Accept new ideas. Learn the other person's perspective. And that's how I live my daily life to this day, and that's something that has never changed. Thank you for listening and watching. This is Andrew. Stay classy.